Dare to explore the extraordinary with Paranormal M. Subscribe and turn on notifications to be the first to experience our latest stories that push the boundaries of belief. Get ready for an unforgettable journey. Story number 1. The Old Man. Since I'm a kid, I've been experiencing some paranormal things, but the one that I want to tell you is one of my first real, unexplained experiences. It started when I was around 13 years old. I came back from college, and I was living in an apartment on the second floor. Every day I used to take the elevator, walking with a heavy backpack plus a long day at school. But this day, even though I grabbed the elevator handle, I let it go. I've never been able to tell why, but something deep inside me told me not to take the elevator. Nothing happened with it, just so you know. So I took the stairs. When I arrived at my floor, in the door to the corridor there was a small window so you could see the stairs through it. It was kind of tall so kids couldn't look through it. Don't know if that's clear. I froze for a second. I saw an old creepy man standing in the doorway looking at me. I froze for a second, and then immediately think it was someone visiting one of my neighbors. There was 4 apartments on every floor. I'd never seen this man before, so I knew it was not one of my neighbors. I grabbed the handle, and I was about to say hi, but as soon as I grabbed it, the face completely vanished. For as long as I thought it was hallucinations or pareidolia, but after that, I didn't tell anyone for years. Some weird stuff started to happen. Things, even an apartment, you can't debunk it. But I kind of try to forget about it. Forget his face looking gray and empty. But 6 years later, my adorable nephew, aged 1 and 1.5, when it happened, was genuinely running in my house while we were in the pool. Her mom was checking on him, when suddenly he walks backwards, pointing at the sofa, starting to cry. We immediately asked what was going on, and he asked who the man was under the sofa. I literally have goosebumps writing this. And at first, we thought maybe an intruder, because we had to, the entrance door, one day next to the garden on one of the back of the house where my dad comes after work. But, of course, my sister didn't see anything, so he starts to cry, and he said word for word, "But, Mommy, there's an old man lying under the sofa." He's very advanced for his age, and so he was already starting to talk very well. 3 years later, he claimed to see the same guy. This time, he didn't get scared of him. He told us it was an old man with gray skin, tall, and he was just standing right next to me and my mom. The way he described him immediately reminded me of the man I saw. Today, I'm pretty sure that's the same person we both saw, but I don't know who it is. Story number 2. Monsters Among Us. This is a story according to my mother's experience when she was a teenager living in a remote village in one of the islands in the Philippines. This happened in the 70s. My mother told me when she first got into high school, she had a seatmate who shares the same name as her. Other than their names, my mother recalled they also share the same interest with music and arts. They instantly clicked, and they became friends. One day, my mother's friends skipped school without notifying their teachers. It was a small village, and most people already knew where each family lives. My mother, being a good friend, thought to visit her friend's house after school to check up on her. Before she got to her friend's house, which is located along the riverbank, several of her classmates stopped her on the way, telling her to never go to that house. My mother said, "Nah, no man." "Why though?" And her classmate said, "Que sila mo kwanong tao," because they eat people. Forgive my attempt at that. Now, this is not new to my mother. She knew about these rumors at the village, but she never believed these type of accusations. She even shared lunches with her friend. The food they shared didn't taste weird. Her friend acts like every other normal person, so she treats her like anybody else. As everybody should. My mother went ahead despite the warnings of her classmates. Now keep in mind that it all happened around 4 or 5 in the afternoon. The sun was still up, and it was still bright in the riverbank. My mother wasn't scared at all until from afar she saw a woman crouching at the riverbed in the shallow part of the river. She initially thought this woman was washing clothes, or maybe peeing in the river. This woman had a long, frizzy, white-haired head and appeared to be wearing a long black dress with its hem already wet by the river's water. My mother kept walking, but when she came closer to the woman, she heard this woman was talking to herself. The woman was covering her face with her palms, whispering, "I hope the sun sets soon, I hope the sun sets soon," over and over. This scared the shit out of my mother. She began sprinting to my grandparents' home. Back home, she thought that the woman that she saw could have been a person with a mental illness, so she tried to forget about it, and she just slept. My mother lives in a nipa hut. Their source of light was only a candle lamp, and they didn't have a mattress. They sleep on the bamboo floors with several cracks on it. At 12 midnight, as my mother thought, she felt movements under the floorboards. She was laying with her back on the floor, but she could feel something or someone is crawling underneath. That's when on her peripheral, she saw long, bony fingers slowly emerging between the floorboards. The fingers were poking in and out of the floorboards as if it was looking for something to feel. It went away for a bit and my mother thought it was gone, until my mother felt the fingers now poking on her back. Then it felt like the fingers were digging into her skin, pinching her. It was so painful she couldn't breathe. She couldn't even make a sound because she was so scared. All she could do is endure the pain and cry silently. That's when the house cat, the hero on this story, bolted outside, knocking down their candle lamp, waking the grandparents. My grandfather, a hunter, took a bolo, a machete, and chased the house cat outside as it appeared to be fighting something. That's when my grandfather saw this big black bird trying to get away from the claws of the cat as it turned into a freaking wild boar before fleeing. My grandfather, even in shock, shouted, "Don't ever come back here, or I will hunt you all." My grandfather guarded the whole house, making rounds all throughout the night until sunrise. My mother never saw her friend since then. A Fisherman's Tale. When my grandparents were still a young couple, they had a fisherman neighbor. Every morning, after fishing at the river, the fisherman will sell whatever he caught at his stall in the village. My grandmother, a frequent customer, became friends with the fisherman. Whenever my grandmother is short of money, the kind fisherman will let my grandmother borrow a fish. One day, my grandmother walked past the stall and noticed neighbors in front. The neighbors said it's been a while since the fisherman last sold fish, so they're hoping that he'll arrive today due to an upcoming feast in the village. One elderly suggested that she's going to go fetch the fisherman at his house. Since the fisherman is also her friend, my grandmother offered to come along. When they arrived outside the fisherman's house, all windows were shut and the door was locked. The elder called out and the fisherman shouted, "Get away!" The elder asked the fisherman what was going on, but the fisherman refused to open the door. My grandmother replied, "Dodong, it's me." Hearing a familiar voice, surprisingly, the fisherman opened the door and invited the elderly and my grandmother inside. Inside, they saw scattered salt and a bamboo spear. The fisherman looked dirty and disheveled. My grandmother asked why he hasn't been selling fish, and the neighbors are starting to worry. The fisherman said he thinks the family at the end of the river is going after him, and he's so scared he can't even leave his house. According to the fisherman, it all started a couple of days ago. While fishing in the river on his usual routine, the fisherman noticed a man watching him from afar. This happened multiple times on different days, but didn't think it was weird. He knew this man, and his wife lives at the end of the river. Since nobody at the village bothered to befriend these mysterious couple, the fisherman decided to visit the couple and say hi. When he arrived, the fisherman said, "Gusto kaba ug itza para sa poniduto." Do you folks want to fish for lunch? The man told the fisherman that they don't have money for the fish and he can catch a fish on his own. The fisherman said he didn't need their money. He was only there to introduce himself since he always sees the man at the river. The couple thanked the fisherman, and to repay his kindness, they offered the fisherman to have lunch at their house, which the fisherman gladly accepted. The wife cleaned the fish outside while the man gathered firewood. The fisherman was asked to wait inside the bamboo house. While inside, he thought to himself, they're going to need salt to season the fish. Without asking the owners of the house, who were both busy preparing lunch outside, the fisherman went to the kitchen to look for salt. He couldn't find salt on the containers on the shelves, so he began looking at the jars under the sink. That's when he smelled foul odor underneath. He continued to look through the jars still. He opened one jar and was horrified with what he had discovered. Inside one of the jars, he saw severed baby fingers. Scared for his life, he crawled silently towards the salon, which is a crawl space leading outside. For a second, he thought of going back for his fishing gears that he had left, but he was petrified that he may not come out alive. He ran as fast as he could without looking back. Knowing he had already ran far enough, he looked back and was shocked that he saw the man a couple of feet away from him. He said the man looked so angry, clenching his fists and foaming at the mouth. The fisherman felt a shiver run down his spine and he peed in his pants. He began running again while screaming prayers. When he arrived at the village, he locked himself in his home. Every night since then, he can see eyes peeking at the corners of his windows. Other times there would be footsteps at his roof. And what scars him the most is when he hears someone whistling or psst sounds, like it's taunting him to come out. He said these creatures cannot come inside the house as he protected himself with the bamboo spike that he made, and because the salt is scattered inside the house. After a week, the fisherman decided to leave the village. He didn't say anything to anyone, nor to my grandmother. He simply vanished and was never to be seen again. Rumors spread at the village like a wildfire. Some think the story was a hoax, thinking the fisherman had already lost his mind from losing his wife due to childbirth a couple years prior. Some believe it's true, including my grandparents. Most of the time, the story was only used to scare naughty kids to prevent them from playing at the river, or to prevent them from staying up late at night. As time goes by, these fears had calmed down, and everybody, including the couple at the river, just simply continued living. Ask Reddit. I'm 40, but back when I was 14 or 15, my uncle left my parents' chalet for a few weeks deep in the wilderness north of Quebec. Took bloody ages to get there. No civilization, no neighbors for miles. I love that place. Huge terrain. And best of all, there was a river running through the terrain. The water was cold and crystal pure. Came directly from the mountains, I guess. The river had a really strong current, too. And the deepest I had was about to my torso, which is probably 4 feet deep, and it was impossible to stand against the current. One day I grabbed my floating board, and I decided to go on a hike along the river on the shore for a good while, and eventually just hop on my board and let the current take me back to the chalet. I never really thought about what was in the woods. In all my times at the chalet, I seen a bunch of deer and a couple of brown bears. Pretty much it. Bears can be scary, but they never really do anything. None of that passed my mind when I started hiking. There was awesome sights on the hike. Saw a baby bear drinking water in the river on the other side of the shore. So cute. Then I remembered mother bears are always with their cubs and super protective. I was a bit scared, to be honest. But when the mom came out of the bushes, she looked at me, barely noticed, and just walked back away in the forest with her cub. I wasn't even a nuisance to her. Me and all my 125 pounds when wet, skinny kid didn't stress her at all. I walked 4 hours, carefree. What's the worst that could happen? Can't get lost. I just followed the river back to the camp. Friggin' idiot. I get to a spot where trees and branches start to get hard to pass by, and the water seems pretty deep. I want to remain as close to the river as possible not to get lost, but I cannot pass. Gotta walk a bit further away from the river and into the forest. I can somewhat see the river through the branches on my left side. Nothing to worry about. That's when I hear something on my right. I didn't even turn to look. Lots of sound can be heard in the forest all around. I'm used to it. But then, man, that feeling of dread. Something is definitely not right. I'm not hearing anything. No birds, not the wind, frickin' silence. But the air feels heavy. I just freeze in my steps, can't move, paralyzed. I look at my right super slowly. There's this huge black mass about 15 feet away from me. 2 bright little round glowing yellow eyes in the middle, and that thing is not moving at all either. Both completely immobile. Me and it. As I look at it more, it's a friggin' wolf. Pitch black looking wolf. It was bigger than that mama bear I saw earlier. Why the is it not moving? And the only thing that came to mind was one day when one of my cats was playing outside. I remember seeing and laughing as my cat became super immobile. I called it and it didn't respond, and noticed the cat was preying a bird not far away. The cat moved slow into position, and then darted at the bird. That's what crossed my mind, but I was the bird. 15 feet away on my right, the wolf, still immobile, looking at me, about 10 feet on my left. The river, but there was tons of branches and bushes in the way. Forget it. I sprinted through the bushes and branches, smacking my face a dozen times, but minor cuts on my arms and legs from running directly through the bushes, and just dove into the river. It was pretty deep from the side of the shore. In my little floating board, I swam to the middle of the river, and the current took me right up. I don't even know if that thing came at me as I got away, or if I scared it. I never looked back. I told my uncle about the frickin' huge wolf. He laughed at me and said in all the years he's been at that place, he never saw a single wolf. That there's no wolf in that area, in fact. Must have been my imagination, he said. I often see those goddamn tiny glowing dots whenever I'm in the forest. Those glowing dot eyes. Ask Reddit. When I was a theater studies student in the Midlands of England, we had to take our little theater company on tour around the local rural countryside as part of the practical side of the course. Being a proper London girl, I wasn't best pleased with the prospect of quote-unquote roughing it. In a 10-person van, there were 15 of us in the company, but for the sake of my art, I stopped being a silly tart and threw myself into it with enthusiasm. One day we broke down in the middle of nowhere, and by the time the AA bloke got to us, and in turn by the time we got to the campsite, all the spaces in the campsite had been taken. We had 3 performances locally the next day. It had gone from 8 p.m. and it was almost pitch dark. We didn't have many options left open to us. Our director said it would be best if we drove the van into the nearby forest and all sleep in the van for the night. And as it was too late to continue driving around and having an early start the following day, we reluctantly agreed. We found a quiet part of the forest that was open with not many trees, and by 9:30 we were settled in the van, if a little cramped and cold. We were all 19 or 20-year-olds, and it was a big adventure. At around 11:30, I was stirred awake by one of my colleagues screaming and another bloke saying, "This is so bad, we're so screwed." To my complete horror through my sleep-blurred eyes, I saw that our little van was completely surrounded by about 50 men, dressed in what appeared to be old-fashioned rural farming clothes, with homemade torches all burning brightly. I started panicking but didn't scream, couldn't take my eyes off the men. They were moving an inch, didn't have any expression on their face, not even when they bibbed and horned at them. 2 of the blokes even got out of the van and shouted at the men, to the total horror of everybody else. Nothing. Needless to say, we were all terrified. Every time we tried to move the van, the men moved a step forward. At 1:30, all the men suddenly just turned around and walked away through the trees. We were absolutely knackered, too tired to drive anywhere else, so we took turns in keeping watch in case the men came back. They never did. Ask Reddit. Not something I saw, but something I heard. I was in upstate New York hunting in the woods during deer season last year. I'd gotten to the stand I was going to sit in during pre-dawn hours, so it was still incredibly dark. I wasn't scared. Even though it was my first time being in the woods while it was that dark, it was actually really exciting to be out there. And I was really looking forward to possibly getting a monster buck. I would talk about that for years, whose points would be just kind of keep growing with every retelling of the story, right? Anyhow, there I was, sitting in the dark, in freezing-ish autumn temperatures, with a rifle across my lap. I was like 10 feet off the ground, too, so that also kept my nerves in check. It was so quiet and dark. I wasn't used to that. I just wanted the damn sun to come up so I could start to warm up a little, and so I'd have enough light to take a good clean shot. I was dressed warm enough, but my father-in-law advised me against wearing thick gloves so I could shoot without them getting in my way, in case I needed to take a quick shot. So my hands were freezing cold, and I kept warming them up in my pockets, armpits, and by breathing on them. I'm not sure how long I was out there, but it felt like hours, and it was so damn dark. I think it was a little cloudy too, because I don't remember being able to see the stars, and there was a minimal amount of moonlight. My eyes kept playing tricks on me in the darkness. I was told deer can be unnaturally quiet, so I kept scanning the shadows and thinking I would see something moving, but it would quickly turn out to be nothing each time. There was no wind, no rain, nothing else happening. Everything was very still. After a while of nothing, out of nowhere I heard a thumping sound. It sounded like a deer thump, like one you could feel in your chest, and it started off slow, then quickly picked up pace like if someone was thumping on their chest. Something like that. I don't know what it was, but I assumed that it was a male turkey, a gobbler, drumming, because I heard something similar when looking up turkey calls. It only happened once, then it was quiet again for what seemed like another long stretch of time. I thought to myself, cool, I wonder what that was. And then something different happened. Another sound started up, but I couldn't for the life of me imagine what could make this sound. It started off low and then picked up volume slowly until it decently was audible, to where it sounded like someone dragging a cardboard box across carpet. It came from in a direction maybe like 50 yards away from my stand, and seemed to remain in one spot, went on for a very long time and would quiet down to a whisper, then slowly pick up volume again, over and over and over and over. I couldn't explain it. It was continuous, keeping the same rhythm and staying in the same spot. Thought maybe it was wind, but nothing was moving, no leaves, branches, or anything. And it wasn't raining either. Otherwise, I would feel and hear it all around, and the sound stayed in the same distance from me, only changing in pitch. I've never heard anything like it in the woods before and haven't since. After a while of this, the sound slowly quieted down until it was completely gone, and all was quiet in the woods again. Then a few minutes later, the sun started coming up. Birds started singing, squirrels started moving about in the leaves, and everything else started to wake up. It was the strangest fucking thing. I stayed in the stand another hour or two before my father-in-law came looking for me. We were on his land. He fetched me to head back to the house, which was quite a ways from the spot that we were at in the woods. We talked all the way back, and I told him how I didn't see a single damn deer and how chilly it was. He chuckled and gave me tips and other pieces of wisdom for the next hunt. Eventually, the house was in view, and we were walking out of the woods. I didn't want to sound stupid, and I didn't want to ask in case it was nothing, but my curiosity had gotten the better of me by that point, and I really wanted to know what I heard out there. I told him about the thumping sound, and he nodded and said it was probably some kind of animal, although he wasn't sure what. He didn't seem fazed, though. I nodded, and then I told him I heard something else too, but I'm not sure what. I explained the whole thing to him the best that I could, and he listened without saying anything or nodding or making any sort of facial expression. And then he changed the subject. I wasn't unsettled about the damn sound until that very moment, because that was just strange to me that he didn't acknowledge what I just told him. I let it go, and I didn't ask again. I did ask my brother-in-law about it later, but he couldn't explain it either. He said it was probably everything warming up and all the vegetation defrosting, but I told him how the sound seemed to only come from one direction and stay in the same general area, and how nothing else was moving at all. It was incredibly dark, but I could still see enough to make out that there were no leaves, branches, trees, and nothing was moving. He couldn't explain it, and the only thing that he could say was, it's really weird. And that was that. None of my buddies at work could explain it. I haven't heard anything like that since. Ask Reddit. I spent a lot of time in my mother's father's house in the woods. This was in the woods of Michigan. My brother and I got lost a lot, but if we could find the train tracks, we could always get back. One time when I was about 8 and my brothers were like 11 or 12, he didn't want me bothering him and ran away, leaving me alone in the woods. I was crying and just wandering around when I came to a house with 2 horses in the pasture. I went and knocked on the door for help. This lady who looked like a fucking older librarian answered and looked really shocked. I whined about my brother leaving me, and she told me to stay at the door while she went back for something, and then she came out to walk me home. I was telling her about the train tracks. She said that she knew where they were. So we get to the tracks, and I'm cheering and pointing in the direction of my grandpa's house. And I turned back, and she was just gone, no trace of her. I went ahead and crossed the tracks and followed the path to the house. My brother was already back, and they were literally all outside about to go looking for me. Grandma had made dinner, and we all went in to eat. I told Grandma that I just wanted to bake cookies for the lady that helped me. She thought that it was one of the neighbors, until I said she had 2 pretty horses. Apparently, none of the neighbors had horses. When I said her house was on the opposite side of the tracks, she said that that was all thick woods and there were only houses on this side of the tracks. I was adamant about what I saw and where I saw this lady, and her house. So the next day, Grandma packed a bunch of sandwiches up for a picnic in the woods to see where I saw the lady and her house. It was a long walk, but we made it to the pasture, except there was no house and no horses. The only thing in the pasture was my hat that I lost while wandering around before finding the lady's house. We still had our picnic, not sure if it was a ghost or fae. Ask Reddit. In Wales, more like a story of what I didn't see, but still. I was 13 years old and I lived in a tiny little village, and one day my dog escaped the back garden and went on an adventure by himself. Concerned about him getting into a field with livestock, I went looking for him around the village and remembered that there was a patch of woodland up on a hill that I'd never been to before. I could imagine the dog would love it there, so I went to check it out. I reached the woods and began to call out the dog's name, hoping he'd come bounding out of the woods. But no sign, so I went further in. I came to a pretty large clearing, and suddenly I felt a little creeped out. I suddenly didn't want to call out for the dog anymore, thought I should be getting home. I left the clearing and began to hurry back the way I came. Only this time I could hear something. There were very clear sounds of footsteps in the dry leaves following behind me, and I mean right behind me, as though someone was walking close enough for me to touch them. Only there was nothing there. I kept stopping to look around, and the footsteps would quickly stop as well. My skin was crawling, but I had a strong sense that I shouldn't run, so I forced myself to keep walking calmly. But I was completely terrified. I managed to walk about 10 steps with the mysterious sounds keeping pace until my nerve went and I broke into a mad run. The worst part is that the moment I ran, I heard a weird, high-pitched little giggle coming from behind me. I got the hell out of there and I never went back. The dumb dog was waiting for me, having made his way home. I'm glad he didn't go into the woods. Might have been dog-napped by the pixies. Ask Reddit. This happened to me and my family very recently. My paternal grandma was dying of cancer, so I made the effort to fly out to see her one last time in December of last year. For some context, my grandpa died at home from his fourth heart attack in 2018, and I have a few other relatives and ancestors who died at the home as well. It's a very old farmhouse, probably built in the late 1800s, that my family purchased when they arrived in the States in the early 1900s. Needless to say, my family roots run deep through that place and the land surrounding it. Prior to my ancestors arriving, the land was heavily populated by the Wabasha tribes. Every year, the tractors till up buckets of more artifacts. So many, in fact, that neither the museums or the local tribal agencies have room for them and simply ask for us to keep what we find, so long as we find it on our land. Otherwise, leave it be. So as you can tell, there's a lot of history going on, I think contributes to the weird supernatural shit going on. Anyway, while my grandma was dying, the farmhouse was rife with paranormal activity. It was actually pretty damn freaky. Nobody could figure out why such things were happening. We'd hear everything from loud, obvious footsteps throughout the house that could last for minutes, to hearing things being shuffled around, seeing things move on their own, seeing figures and forms darting this way and that. They weren't just old house noises or animals running about. These were extremely obvious happenings with no obvious reasoning behind them. I got worried that we were all going crazy or dying of carbon monoxide poisoning or mold toxicity or both. But we had working carbon monoxide detectors in almost every room, and my family had done a pretty good job at locating and killing any mold in the house. I also hypothesized that it could be funky EMFs caused by old wiring, that we were fucking with us maybe, but the wiring was redone in the mid-90s to make the house safer, and my jack-of-all-trades family had been keeping it updated for electronics and safety shit. Finally, my grandma was having a lot of near-death visions of loved ones. Most notably, she told me her twin sister had come by to visit, saying that she and my grandma would spend Christmas together. I knew my grandma had a twin sister, but what I didn't know was her twin sister died in 2016. When I told my dad, who is a rather obnoxious atheist, I'll add, what Grandma told me, he was speechless for a moment before telling me that my grandma's twin had died several years ago from lung cancer. With all that out of the way, one of the strangest things out of all of this happened when me and a bunch of my family, my dad, uncles, aunt, handful of cousins, were all seated around the dining room table at night, playing cards and telling stories. My grandma had run out of steam a couple hours before and had gone to bed. Somehow our conversation turned towards the strange happenings in the house, as well as my grandpa's passing. Jokingly, one of my cousins said, "If Grandpa's here with Grandma, can you do something to make yourself known?" Right away, an antique cabinet drawer right next to my cousin's chair swung open with force, and a stack of papers slid out. Upon further inspection, the yellowed, stained papers that slid out were a handful of bird drawings my grandpa had done in elementary school. It was called My Bird Book, signed his name, and included 10 drawings of his favorite local birds. It was both freaky and comforting, to say the least. Ask Reddit. About 2 or 3 years ago, I was working for Cox Communications. It's an internet service, and being one of the representatives, they would send me around to different Best Buy locations as a third party to sell internet. One of the locations I was going to, I'd never been to before, and it was, I want to say, a few nights before the day I was going to be going to this new location that I had a dream about already being there. In my dream, I had to walk into the back room where it was like a warehouse that had all of these washers and dryers and dishwashers. And in my dream, I had a conversation with somebody I couldn't really see their face, but I kind of remembered the conversation. Fast forward a few days later, and I'm at my normal location at my job. My boss calls me and tells me he needs me to go to the Maryland Parkway store. That's the store that I've never been to. I go, and once I'm there, a customer needed to speak to the manager and saw me and asked if I could help her get to one of them. So I saw a manager go into the warehouse in the back of the Best Buy, and I went to go get him. I felt this tingling feeling when I was walking and ignored it. Then I walked into the back, and bam! Washers and dryers and dishwashers everywhere. I was standing right where I was in my dream, seeing everything I was seeing. I thought I was dreaming again, but then the manager came to me and said, "Do you need something?" And just like my dream, even though I didn't see his face in the dream, we had the same exact conversation. It's been happening here and there lately, but that was the strongest connection I've ever had with the dream. Don't know if anybody else experiences this. Story number 11. Another Ask Reddit. So before my mother met my father, she was married once before. Let's call him Charlie. My mother adored Charlie, and for good reason from what I'm told. Charlie was kind, patient, and he loved my mother dearly. He didn't have a gecko. One night, my mother woke up to a horrific gargling noise. She looked over at Charlie to find he was choking on his own vomit. No alcohol involved, mind you. By the time the ambulance arrived, he was gone. My mother's grief was profound, but life keeps moving. Eventually. So did she. 4 to 5 years later, my parents wed, and he had me. Apparently, I would often speak to myself in my room. I was around 2-ish, old enough to hold a rudimentary conversation. My mother and father assumed it was simply the innocent rambling of a toddler, thought nothing of it. Time passes, and she starts to worry. Feeling emboldened to ask about it, she enters my room and interrupts my lonely conversation with, "Who are you speaking to?" I apparently looked at her like it's obvious and reply, "He's my friend, and he says he knows you, Mama. His name's Charlie." My mother was stunned. The conversation continued until I apparently grew out of them. They say age desensitizes you. Who knows? I often quietly pay my respects to Charlie. I recently went to his grave with my mother. If it weren't for his untimely passing, I'd never have been here. Ask Reddit. When I was in grade school, my friend and I had to come in one Saturday to do some cleaning as punishment for something that we did. They had us go to the church, which was associated with the school, and help the priest lead the room full of boxes and told us to help organize things. I guess it was all stuff people donated, and we were tasked with separating books from clothing, things like that. Anyway, there had always been this rumor that there was a secret bowling alley in the basement of the church, and my friend and I were definitely going to take this opportunity to find out if that was true. After watching us for about 10 minutes, the priest leaves us alone and said he'll come back later to check up on us. We waited a few minutes and then decided to try and find the basement. This church was huge, so it wasn't easy, but it was fun. Felt like being in some heist movie. About 20 minutes or so, we finally found it. We walked into this giant room with tables and chairs stacked everywhere. The only light that we had was this shitty flashlight from my friend's flip phone. We eventually found a light and realized where we were. We found the bowling alley. It was only a couple of lanes and looked in pretty bad shape. Probably hadn't been used for decades, and now they just used the space to store tables and chairs. It was cool to discover that the rumor was true, but at the same time, it was kind of disappointing. I looked it up years later, and I guess the church closed because of the deterioration in 1988, and it was reopened in 1992. I guess they didn't feel it was worth fixing. So now it's just a giant storage room. No ghosts in that story, but still cool. Peculiar Facebook Marketplace buyer told me my headboard was possessed. A seller messages me, looking to purchase the headboard for their new room. They come out, look at the headboard. My daughter touches the headboard and then goes and whispers to her mom. Mom says, "I don't think this will match our room." I politely say goodbye and they drive away. 15 minutes later, presumably they returned home, I get a series of messages from the person. Yeah, this is the conversation. Person: just wondering, have you lost somebody recently? Has someone close to you died recently? Me: no, family's all in good health. Person: well, I'm not sure what you believe in, or don't believe in, but my daughter has a spiritual gift, and she's a medium. That headboard has an angry spirit attached to it, and that's why she doesn't want it. And now she's in excruciating pain. It's like the spirit doesn't want you to sell it. So, think outside a close family member, anybody else that you may have lost recently, maybe a friend, or maybe the spirit was already attached to the headboard when you got it. Where'd you get the headboard? Me. I purchased it from the original owner, a family in the suburbs with 2 kids. They got it from some store. Person: well, they may have lost someone, or there may have been someone in one of those two houses. But there is an angry spirit, a male, attached to that headboard, and does not want to leave, or for you to sell it. So if any other medium comes to look at it, they won't buy it either. Since now the spirit is attached to you and doesn't want to leave you, and lets the medium know with anger, heat, and fire. Best of luck to you for as long as the spirit stays inside the headboard. There's no way to get rid of it. My daughter's hand is still on fire with spiking pain. Will be that way for a while. Me. I do hope your daughter's headache and hands, all those aches pass soon. Thank you for the information, although it doesn't seem to align with anything that we know about the headboard. I don't believe in spiritism and mediumship. However, my wife does. She's not a medium, but some of her family are, and have visions of deceased people. Person. Not a headache. Her hand where she touched the headboard is on fire and has spiking pain running through it, as this is what angry spirits do to mediums. Person. None of the mediums you know will probably be able to feel or sense this spirit, as he is quite strong if he can place himself inside wood and cause heat and fire transfer. Tell your wife if she will believe it. Me. Thinking hand pain equals allergy. Me. Okay, for what it's worth, I did wipe down the headboard with a diluted lavender cleaner similar to Lysol. Person. Means nothing. Me. Although you're certain of your daughter's assessment, I figured I'd mention it. Person. No, I'm positive of her abilities, God-given. At this point, my attention was called away for 3 hours. When I got back, the kind lady had blocked me. Anyway, that's the story. Wife found her account, and all my means that she seemed like a pretty normal person. Anyway, I'm not posting this to shame the person, her daughter, or the alleged abilities. If I did, I'd have posted this to some other sub. Story number 14. I was being watched by the Hat Man for most of my childhood. When I was around the age of 10, I felt like I was being watched all the time, every day. That feeling never went away. Sometimes this thing, quote-unquote, or spirit, quote-unquote, did show itself. It was a tall man wearing all black with a black hat, and sometimes had glowing red eyes, if I remember right. I was very scared and didn't know if this man or spirit would do anything to me, but he made me feel unsafe, and it felt like he was going to harm me in some way. I don't know how, but something like murder or give me some very life-threatening injuries, maybe kidnap me, I'm not sure. But as a 10-year-old, that scared the living shit out of me. I remember some nights I couldn't sleep in my own room. I couldn't have the window closed, even if it was very hot outside my room, because there was a chance that he might come in through the window. If he wasn't under the bed, in the closet, or behind my curtains. Some days I couldn't be alone anywhere, like I couldn't be in the living room and my mom was in the kitchen. I felt like this man could come and get me. This kept going until I was around 14, I think. Even the not sleeping in my room, I was sleeping on the couch in the living room with my mom. But over the years, I felt the presence of this man or spirit, and it only got worse. He could be anywhere from behind a door to the smallest cracks, like between the sofa and the floor. I'm not sure how, but he went away, and I just kind of woke up one day and he was gone. But lately, I felt his presence slowly coming back. Not how it was when I was a kid, but I still know he's watching me. Not that long ago, I got to know about the Hat Man and did some research and found out that I'm not the only one who's seen or felt like I've been watched by this unknown man. And it's quite scary to think about that this is even happening to many people, so it's probably not just some weird illusion or some weird brain thing. Can someone tell me what this is? I'm a 22-year-old female. I currently live with my boyfriend and 2 cats. At around 18, when I lived with my parents, I started having some paranormal things happen to me. It started with hearing my cat's bells. Now that I'm thinking about it, this cat was a gift from my best friend. He was an elderly cat, and that's owner's passed away. Unfortunately, I had to give him back to my best friend because I was moving. But the fact that his owner passed away has me thinking now. I would be lying on the bed with my cat and I would hear his bells from his toys underneath my bed or on the wood floor. It always creeped me out a bit, but I just tried to tell myself it was my grandparents letting me know that they're here. I started to see blobs of color. Very hard to describe, but I know I wasn't crazy because my best friend would assure me that she could also see them. Then the most significant thing happened. We were home alone, just got back from school. My parents have a dog who's very territorial and will always let you know if something is knocking on the door or coming inside. We heard someone rush through the front door and start playing the TV, washing dishes and using the microwave. But the dog hadn't made a peep. I yelled, "Anybody there?" No response. We looked outside. Still, no cars parked. I never went downstairs because I was terrified. But yeah, that happened. I moved to my sister's house. Still saw the blob. Still heard the bells. Mind you, I didn't have that cat anymore, from when I started to hear the bells in the first place. I did have a new cat, and I still heard the bells. Tried not to scare myself whenever I saw or heard these things, though. Then I moved again, into my boyfriend's house. There was definitely some spirits before we moved in. I would see figures out of the corners of my eye all the time. I was terrified there. And I still heard the bells. Now I live in a different apartment, and I still hear the bells yet again. I haven't seen the blob since I lived with my sister, though. But it's currently almost 4 a.m., and I heard the bells going crazy. It's not my cats. They're on my bed, and they don't have collars with bells or anything. There's one single toy in my apartment with the bell, and it suctions to a wall that's not in my bedroom where I always hear the bell. For some reason, it freaked me out a little extra tonight. I just want to know if this has ever happened to anyone else. Is it a ghost, or am I just paranoid? I'm home alone most days as my boyfriend is always at work, and I'm used to it. I'm never paranoid about being home alone. However, today I was in the bathroom when I heard my cabinets opening and closing. I also heard someone's heavy footsteps, as well as the vibration walking across my floor. I have envelopes lying on the ground near the door and heard them crunch underneath someone's feet. I'm on the top floor, so I never hear or feel anyone else's footsteps except for my boyfriend's when he's home. It sounds like someone was wearing boots walking around my kitchen and living room, and it's a small apartment, so I hear everything. I panicked and I decided to call 911 because the footsteps did not stop. Once they arrived, no one was here. The door was locked just as I had left it, and there was zero signs of forced entry. My cabinets were in fact crept slightly open, and I never do that. All of my things are still in the same spot that I left them. No other people in the apartment building are home. 2 other occupants, and they're both at work. So the footsteps couldn't have possibly come from anyone else. Absolutely zero sign of someone else being in here with me besides the cabinets being slightly open. I'm not a person who would be paranoid from a few strange noises while home alone, but this sounded way too much like someone was with me in here. Was it a hungry ghost? Was I paranoid for some reason? Did someone break in and for no reason and just lock the door and leave? I'm so confused. abnormal dreams, looking for others that might have them. Just to make a point, twice I've dreams of children, weird dreams, like I held a small boy and it was not my kid. I looked around and asked, "Who's this kid?" And an old friend turned to me and said, "It's my boy," and I woke up. The day after I went to see him, thought I would tell him about the dream, and when I did, he laughed and said that his girlfriend, I didn't know he had one by the way, was pregnant, and they were going to announce it. Turned out it was a boy. When my girlfriend got pregnant, I had a similar dream. I held two beautiful girls, and I cried because I was so happy. They were my girls, and when I woke up, I laughed and told my girlfriend that we would have twin girls, and turns out we actually did. Here's a freaky one. I had just moved to Australia to study, and I had a vivid dream of a monster chasing me in a desert, and I went into a room. It's in the middle of the desert, trying to escape, but it had no windows except for the door I came in through, and then the monster came inside, and I was terrified. At that point, a man dressed in white said my name and told me I was dreaming, and I knew right away that it was a dream, and all the fear disappeared. I thanked him, and he said that he was here to warn me, and told me that I would die if I stayed in Australia. I asked him maybe 20 questions of why and when, and so many things, and he just replied on each and every thing. This was my first day there, and I came late at night. I asked him in the end if I would believe this when I woke up. He told me, some do, some don't. I begged him to show me a sign in the real world. He said it was very difficult, but he would try and would see the sign over odd word. At that point, I had no idea what that word meant, and I thanked him, and we shook hands, and I woke up in that very moment. Later that day, I saw that word on the apartment building next door. Sure, my subconscious could have picked it up and created this vivid dream, but he told me that they warn everybody all the time. Here's a second one that's odd, and those odd ones I have difficulty forgetting. I had a dream, and it was a normal dream, but at one point I saw a door and I was clearing my head, like I knew that it was a dream, but that door was not supposed to be there. It was in my town and the door was misplaced, so the dream kind of just stopped, and I went inside the door where I met this weird guy that got startled and told me I wasn't allowed to be in here. But I remained, and he had this computer, quote-unquote. It was made of glass and lights. He told me that this was all of our lives, and he showed me my lives. It was hundreds of them. The glass thingies could connect them, and I could see moments from those lives. It had green and red, and those lights represented good and bad times. A red life meant I had a bad life, a tough one, and if you opened it, there could be both red and green moments, but the overall was red. I was shown that my younger brother and I shared a lot of lives together, but my other siblings shared only this one. I asked to see the last life that he showed me again. He told me that here time ends. He opened it, and I saw a fish-like person swimming in a dark ocean with a bunch of others. Kind of like mermaids, but not like anything I'd ever seen before. I thanked him, went out the door. Sure, it could be a dream. It was a dream, but it stuck hard with me for some reason. Then we have the last one. My very first dream I had as a toddler, over and over and over. And whatever I did, I could never change a single thing in this dream. It played like a movie until it ended, the same as it did every night. I had this dream for years. Lived in a house with a mom and dad. She was sick, always at home, and he, I think, was a carpenter. I had my room up the steps in the living room, and my mom would always walk into the kitchen and grab a knife, which my dad took out of her hand and cried and begged her to stop, but she was ill somehow. And this day in my dream, my dad was fixing the roof, and she chased me with the knife. I climbed the stair to reach him, and before I could, she stabbed me in the back, and I died right there in his arms. and I floated above him, holding me in this dream. I don't know, I remember it so well, every detail of it printed in my mind. Bonded with an animal. Anyone know what it's called, or have had a similar experience? As a kid, I was physically abused daily, beaten by many, an easy target. My stepdad was as evil as so many around him. A small town that just didn't like the scrawny kid that was me, that had a dad in a foreign country. Why I say this is because it's part of the story. I had no one in my life, my mother always away working, my siblings older or avoiding me, as no one wants to be around the kid that gets beaten because they will too. My mom once took me to see my aunt. She had kittens and went up to see them, and all of them were feeding except one, an odd-looking red thing that was away from his mother, making small sounds, all lost and so tiny. My aunt said that he probably wouldn't make it, as the small ones rarely do, as they struggle to find the tit and so forth and so on. So I helped him. Every day I begged my mom to visit, and we did when we could, and I always found him lost somewhere, blind, abandoned, and brought him to his mom, played with him, sat with him, talked to him, until one day, when I was there and my aunt said that I could take him home, my mom nodded, happy to stay my life. He was such a scared thing, always frightened, and he used to sit inside my t-shirt close to my body. Only place that he would be quiet and not cry out. He slept with me, ate with me, and I tried to leave him somewhere that he could just cry and cry and cry. So it pretty much ended up that I had him on my shoulder like a parrot. He loved it. From the start of the day till the end, until we got into my room. And then he went bananas, running wild. And I trained him for battle with my teddy bears and stuffed animals, and I loved him with all my heart. He followed me wherever I went. When I walked to school, which took 30 minutes, he would sneak after me, hiding in the woods, because he knew if I saw him, I would take him home and lock him inside, because I feared that he would get hurt, either by once beating me or the train or the cars. So I used to stand still, looking into the woods, and I'd say, "I see you. I know you're there, come out." And he would come forward, feeling busted, purring, and I had to grab him, run home, lock inside, and run back. I have thousands of stories like this. Like Christmas. I was sitting on the edge of the sofa, and he came inside the room, jumped up onto the sofa, and everybody tried to grab him and pet him. And he just ran past them all and threw himself down on my lap, purring. It was me and him against the world. During winter, I used to walk deep into the snowy woods, and he would sit on my shoulder or jump in my footprints. There we would lay down and watch the stars until it was frozen solid. Then he'd just lay on my chest purring. I truly loved him. And I always knew that he was around me. He just had to peek left or right or something, and there he was, sneaking around following me. Until one day, one dreadful day, I was inside my neighbor's house playing tabletop games, and in a blink of a moment, I was struck with immense pain in my chest, and I knew something had happened to him. I told my neighbor that I had to go find my cat, that something had happened, and they went outside and he wasn't out there, waiting for me like he always did. I searched all day and didn't find him. My mom went to part with my awful stepdad, and I kept looking. When the clock was 4 p.m, my mom came back, and I met her one night in the streets, and she was surprised to see me up. I told her I'm looking for my cat. With a drunk voice, she told me that he was dead, had been hit by a car, and they hid him from me because they knew how close we were. The next day, I buried him with the most precious things I owned. I felt like something was ripped from my chest. How can that be the moment it happened? How could I have felt that? What does that mean? I doubt I could ever get a bond like that again. I've had plenty of pets after. Nothing remotely as powerful as this.